From what I'm told, the most common reason for young people distancing themselves from a faith tradition like Catholic Christianity is because of the apparent conflict between belief in God and science and reason. Because if there is a conflict there, then of course belief in God is going to appear to be the more irrational one, and perhaps one that is inspired by emotional or psychological weakness. So I sympathize and can perfectly understand why someone who might not want to be associated with those things surrenders to the apparently logical and scientific position. But what if this supposed conflict is based on entirely irrational and fallacious premises? What if conceding that ground means embracing something that has been shrewdly branded as the more reasonable position, but is actually utterly incoherent? Well, why don't we find out? Before I jump into the content of this video, let me just say that if you're watching content like this online, it's probably a reasonable guess that you have some interest in philosophy and theology, and that's awesome. But why not consider exploring that at a more academic level? If you have an aptitude for this kind of thing, then you should seriously consider enrolling in a school like Franciscan University of Steubenville, which has the largest theology and catechetics program in North America. And then instead of just being a casual observer of theology and philosophy, you can become an actual expert, the kind of person who could jump into comment threads on videos like this and point out all the mistakes that an amateur like myself is prone to making. But it's actually better than that, because in addition to becoming an expert in these concepts, you'll also be learning from faith-filled instructors like Dr. Scott Hahn or Dr. Bob Rice, who will not only teach you theology, but they will teach you what it means to communicate this stuff in a way that is in accord with the teachings of Christ, so that you don't become the kind of person who immediately jumps into comment boxes to criticize amateurs like myself and the mistakes that we are prone to making. So if that interests you, then you should check out their Masters of Arts in Catechetics and Evangelization, or their Masters of Theology in Christian Ministry, which can both be taken fully online. So if you want to learn more about that, check out franciscan.university/BH. And I'm going to include the link to that in the description for this video, as well as the comments if you're watching this on Facebook. Okay, so getting back to the topic of this video, I'm just going to jump into 3 reasons why belief in God does not conflict with science. Reason number 1, God isn't physical. When people say that there isn't evidence for the existence of God, they're using this word evidence in a very narrow way. What they mean is that there isn't scientific evidence for God. And that depends on a very narrow understanding of this word science, which is to say the physical sciences. Well, if we set aside those very narrow definitions, then yes, you're right. If you say that there aren't any physical traces that can be empirically measured of God, yeah, you're right. Because God, who created the physical world, who created matter, is not physical. To insist on using a method that is designed to observe and interpret physical phenomenon in order to render a judgment about God, who is claimed to not be a physical phenomenon, is what's known logically as a category mistake. It's like saying that the color blue doesn't exist because you can't hear it. Or it's like saying that 2 + 2 = 4 isn't correct because you can't taste it. It's treating something according to a category that it doesn't belong to, and then criticizing it according to this very irrational and embarrassing axiom. God, as he is proposed by monotheistic religions like Christianity, is not a physical being inside the universe, which is why taking your telescope and pointing it in a certain direction in order to discover God is categorically irrational. To bring some resolution to the question of God, you need to appeal to something that is, yes, logical, but not dependent upon physical evidence. And this is philosophy. And as soon as you do that, you will discover that there are mountains of logical arguments for the existence of God. Reason number 2, proof requires sufficient understanding of the proof. When someone says, "Prove God to me," they're neglecting a really serious problem with their understanding of this concept of proof, because in order for something to have been proven to someone, they have to have the mental capacity to understand the proof that is offered to them. Like, imagine if you could sit down a group of preschoolers, so like 4-year-olds, and explain to them Newton's laws of motion, and you recite it perfectly without a single error. At the end of that, could it be said that you had proven it to them? Well, I would say no, because they wouldn't be able to understand the proof that is offered. They don't have the intellectual capacity to understand the explanation or to scrutinize the apparent proof. So in the end, all you can do is insist on what is true and invite them to believe you. In other words, they have to accept it on faith. And the gap between the intellectual capability of a 4-year-old and Newton's laws of motion is nothing compared to the gap between our intellectual capability and the God who created the universe and all of its governing laws. Like, imagine if God could send you an email with an equation that proves exactly who and what he is. Do you think any of us could make sense of that equation? Of course not. God, in order to be God, must be higher than us. But anything that is beneath our ability to understand is not higher than us, it is beneath us, and therefore could not be God. So to insist that God be proven to us like this is to insist on a contradiction. It seems like we want a God who is sufficiently great enough that we can call it God or him God and worship him, but we also want a God who is sufficiently easy enough to understand so that it doesn't require faith to believe in him. Well, you can't have them both. Reason number 3, subtly embedded within this kind of thinking that I've been describing, is a premise that has been accepted without much scrutiny. And so I think it's important that we drag it out from those recesses, those dark corners, because as soon as we do, it's really apparent how absurd it is. It's the notion that all knowledge must be scientifically verifiable, or that nothing can be said to be true unless it has been verified by science. I think that informs a lot of people's assumptions, and it is what they bring towards ideas and how they scrutinize them for how supposedly reasonable they are. But the problem with this assumption is that it's entirely self-refuting because it isn't itself scientifically verifiable. If all truths must be scientifically verified, then the claim that all truths must be scientifically verified must itself be scientifically verified. And it isn't. It's a philosophical principle, and it's a bad one. It's like if somebody held up a book and said, all truths which are known are contained within this book. And then you open it up and you discover that the truth that all truths are contained within this book isn't in the book itself, which makes it self-refuting. So I hope some of that helps you see why there isn't a conflict between faith and science. And science in this respect just really doesn't have anything to say about the existence of God one way or the other, the physical sciences that is. And if you really want to explore questions of God's existence, I'd invite you to look beyond the physical sciences to philosophy. And as you do so, you should find a rich deposit of evidence in favor of belief in the existence of God. Thank you so much for watching that, you guys. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider subscribing and hitting that bell if you're on YouTube, or just liking and following from wherever you are and wherever you happen to be watching this from. And if you want to support the making of these videos, then please consider supporting my work as a digital media and marketing expert. My company, Holdsworth Design, is a branding and communications company that specializes in web design and logo and branding, graphic design, videography, and communications and marketing strategy. So if you know of a parish or a diocese or a business or a ministry that needs help in those areas, then please send them our way, and I'm sure that we can probably help them out. And be sure to check out the website, which is holdsworthdesign.com.